Beard certified.
All right. I'm going to give everybody just a minute to get in. As usual, the chat function is live. We'll be able to see your comments and put them up on screen. So if you're here and watching, please comment, make this fun and interactive. We are here for episode 9 of Beard Banter. I don't know why I have not gotten the hook yet and been pulled off the public internet, but it would appear we are still continuing to converse about cybersecurity issues today. So happy to be joined by John Harden. John is a friend of mine and is leading kind of some of the things that I think support a lot of what my vision is of where we're going from a technology perspective. And John has also brought Cody, who is a practitioner in our space, and in some ways I think exemplifies the model of where we're heading as MSPs and as technology providers in general, I suppose, to drop the acronyms. So let's get started. John, if you want to kick off and introduce yourself and tell me about what you do, and then Cody will do the same for you.
Yeah, hey there, John Harden. Matt, thanks for having us here. I tried to cut the beard as much as I could before I hopped on.
Funny story, you had to shave it, right? Why did you have to shave it last week, John?
You're right. Okay, good call me. I had to shave it for my engagement dinner on Friday with my now fiance. So it's for a good reason. It's for a good reason to look clean. Yeah, thank you.
You heard it here first, folks.
I could not get on Amazon and get a fake beard shipped fast enough. I looked like 2 days ago, it hit me. I'm like, I'll send Cody and us fake beards and we'll belong.
I'm going to get a MattLee branded beard, right? Like that's what I'm going to do so that you can just order the beard before the show. Yeah, like that's perfect.
Merch. That's your next expansion, Matt, is the merch.
I've already got it going, brother. I've already got it. Yeah,
Thanks,
Lance said congrats. So that's awesome. It's the same thing here. So
there we go. Well, we got some engagement there. But now we'll bore them. I'm a longtime IT nerd too. Spent 15 years in this sector of MSP. And like we're going to be talking about today, I'm super passionate to talk about the future of MSP. The modern MSP is what I like to keep calling it. And, I worked my way up from the frontline knock into where I am now as a founder over here at SaaSlio, helping the modern MSP tackle the new age problems in the industry. And so I'm the founder at SaaSlio because as a nerd, I have been using SaaS for far too long in way too many applications, and I've continued to see it explode. I've watched businesses spend way, way, way too much money on SaaS, get death by 1,000 cuts, lose too much data on SaaS platforms, and just overall not really conquer it. So I think the best people suited to solve the problem in the small medium business world are the MSPs, the ones that are already there. And so I'm just building a tool to help those MSPs talk to the small, medium businesses about SaaS and SaaS management and SaaS security. And I'm excited because I think that next generation and that modern MSP, once we've got a lot of the technology moved to the cloud and we're talking about the next age, there are going to be those IT advisories. And why would you not talk about SaaS?
Well, and I heard Dave Sobel actually talked about this today, and we'll get into it here in a minute. But like that's my vision too. I actually call it my cliff that's coming, right? And this giant change, and we'll talk about that. And so, thank you, John. I sure appreciate you being here, Cody. Let's go ahead and introduce yourself, and let's kick it off.
Thank you, sir. Cody Rivers. I'm the CTO of AIS, and we're MSP here. Practitioner, obviously love to be tortured, MSP, so constantly trying to evolve our practice and find new ways to, to provide value to our clients and help them grow.
Yeah, it's awesome. So let's set the stage. I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk really quickly, that's hard to believe, but about what I think the vision is. And so if you look back in the beginning of technology times as we kind of see them in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and you start getting into, this massive proliferation of technology in our world, right? Just rapid. And it was usually Active Directory centric, right? Like after Server 2000, right? In that time frame, you started going Microsoft Active Directory, you create all this infrastructure. The infrastructure was on bare metal, which means it was installed directly on the server. It then moved to potentially virtualization internal to your network. And then it moved to virtualization somewhere else, right? The colos, other people's data centers, IaaS, infrastructure as a service. But this kind of world is shifting kind of the same way that I think that the Industrial Revolution did, right? You started with steam boilers and you started with, all this nascent technology. There was limited regulation around it. There was limited guidance around its safety and efficacy. And it kind of just got put everywhere. And then factories blew up and steam boilers popped and you had challenges and all this stuff grow. I say all that to say we're heading towards a world where we're getting easier and more normalized in the technologies we use. If you started a company tomorrow, this is the simple premise. Would you put servers in a closet? Would you put infrastructure together? Would you install software? Would you run things? Or would you probably buy either Google, Azure Active Directory, Okta, or one of those major identity providers, and then use that identity to simply sign on with Microsoft, quote unquote, to dumb down SSO, and simply go into your application? If you've ever seen sign in with Facebook or sign in with Microsoft, that is simply extending one identity into another service that's consuming that identity, or a service provider. So in this case, if you just use SharePoint or SharePoint for files and Salesforce Online and QuickBooks Online and all of these other hundreds of applications that are the main SaaS apps, then to me as an MSP, the traditional commoditizing of patching and updates and all these things become things that are just a script. They're all identical. They're the same GUID differences, the same, application we're targeting differences, but ultimately it's a very normalized set of variables, which means that from a support perspective, what we are doing today as an MSP is a commodity. It is something that has just become commoditized down to just a table stakes operation. How do you add value? That's the simple premise. And at the same time, those competitions starting up, the people saying, I'm not going to have that infrastructure. I'm not going to be dependent on all these old things. I'm going to start secure first. I'm going to deal with zero trust. I'm going to start doing those kind of capabilities that are being delivered mean they're going to be a better company. They're going to do it more efficiently. They're going to be able to hire and attract talent. They're going to be able to grow and be strategic. They're going to be able to be fast and flexible. And so I think that's the vision of the future that we all kind of commonly share. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation. I'm like a kid in a candy store right now with my friends talking about this. But the point is that if you imagine that, then that means there's a cliff coming for people doing traditional value add, IT services. Help desk is going to be still a differentiator and required to some extent, but ultimately it's going to be strategic services. It's going to be counseling about your business objectives and technology and how that flows and how I can save you money and those kind of things. So that's the stage setting. I'd love to jump into it with kind of like, Cody, tell me about what you were saying earlier about your practice and kind of what you already are doing towards that end and what you work on.
Absolutely. So we try to be a cloud first practice, right? And get away from the conventional patch management, asset inventory. Those things, of course, are still necessary and important, but as you said, it's commoditized. And so it's at that point, it's a race to the bottom for I can get this cheaper or this. And then you find yourself in a technical, delineation conversation with a non-technical person. So you're already kind of off kilter of trying to show your value. And so we've tried to shift that to say, okay, these are required things. How can we solve problems? What are your goals that are outside that IT can solve? So we're not thinking about having IT to exist, but taking IT to make them a differentiator, to make them more profitable, to make them work faster.
Yeah, and sometimes it's education, right? Like sometimes it's like, hey, you have this tool. Do you know what this does? Like, let me help you understand how you can get more out of this. And John and I were kind of riffing about that. John, you can kind of speak towards like that aspect of what you're seeing in the market, right? This kind of consolidation of SaaS applications. And maybe John can. He's freezing up on us, but we'll see if he's audio here.
Maybe my mouth's not moving, but I can tell you from that perspective. I mean, we just crunched the numbers last night, and the average 100-person company is using 136 applications, 136 business applications.
That's probably accurate. Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, if my director of product, Ben, is on here, he'll know I preach, what we serve, what we preach. Like, we internally keep it as streamlined as possible. Like any new tool, any new piece of shadow IT, I yell and I throw the ban hammer on it until we adopt the most of every single part of our platform possible, whether it's HubSpot, whether it's Workspace, whether it's Azure, whatever it might be. But the thing is that like this practice, this muscle, that's a muscle, by the way. Don't click on the trial, sign up, and just get pulled into the SaaS ecosystem. Trust me, SaaS companies spend way more money figuring out how to get you to do it than your team spends on probably an IT budget. General.
Well, let's dig into some of that though, real quick, because that general principle, right, John? Like you're saying, hey, we want to try to maximize the most out of a tool. If we looked at that from a cybersecurity perspective, what most people miss is that cybersecurity is nothing more than the CIA triad, right? And for anybody that's just kind of following in, and I'll do this ELI 5, the CIA triad is that your data is the subject of this. It's any data, whatever we produce. It's other people's data. It's all these other things. Yeah, 136 apps, nice. It's all these other things, but you're trying to either protect the confidentiality of it, the integrity of it, or the availability of it. Well, when you go towards cloud, the availability is being transferred from a risk perspective mostly to the cloud provider, especially in SaaS, right? And so you're already dealing with that. But the confidentiality and integrity actually get easier if you have less app spread, right? If I have 100 apps to try to figure out the permission settings, where data is flowing, what kind of data loss prevention capabilities do I have, how do I, versus 7, right? Then I have a much different surface area of being able to know and tell an articulate story from a compliance perspective where that data is in its data lifecycle, right? And so there's the aspect of this beautiful part of the security kind of value of trying to reduce the number of things you're using. But the availability and tracking and the user experience side of it is also better when you stay in app, usually, right? When you're not having to cross out of the Microsoft ecosystem, or if you're not having to cross out of the X, insert X here, HubSpot in your example. So I think that's a really great story to tell as to why you would reduce the app spread, not just the money.
Well, and I think MattLee, I think that's the case, right? Like there's a lot of different lenses. I always say SaaS kind of has 3 different eyes that you can look at: it's security, operation, and cost. You know, you've got the operational inefficiencies of having multiple file sharing systems. You've got the cost implication of multiple file sharing systems. But let's focus on the big one, that security implication of it. I mean, we just worked with a 50-man company that had 6 file sharing systems, all with critical business data in them. And it's because...
And I'm sure it was well cataloged and it was listed out exact... Oh, maybe
no, absolutely. Absolutely. They knew about it, I'm sure. But the thing about it is because they're just trying to solve a business problem. That's what the root of it is. Like somebody's just trying to achieve a business outcome. They just don't have that muscle to know that that's not right. And that's where the MSP gets to come in and be that advisor and say, this isn't how you should be running your practice. We've got OneDrive, we've got SharePoint, use Google Drive if you're using Google Drive, whatever it might be. But 5 different applications to achieve the same outcome is just every sort of wrong.
Cody, how do you deal with that educational burden? Do you guys and gals spend a lot of time in an educational basis? Is it how do you handle that? Because that's a tough one to tackle, I think.
Well, you know, I do a lot of analogies all the time with people, you know, and I go back to say similar to, right? It's so similar to a doctor. If my foot hurts and I keep going every week, I get my weekly Tylenol and I go home, right? That's old MSP. I have a problem, they solve and go home. Why does it keep hurting? Well, actually, we looked at the scan of your body. You've got a wonky hip. You've got a worn out right.
You call me fat, Cody?
I would never.
I got you, bro. It's all right.
You've got a worn down shoe, but that's why it keeps going on, and we see what's going on. I give you some insight, and you fix the root of the issue, so it doesn't keep recurring. And so, like we use SaaSlio at AIS, and it's been great to give us those insights into our customers because we can see those things. You ask someone, "Hey, what all do you have?" I just use these 2 things. Most customers, I'm not sure, I don't know that number, but I would say an even greater number of people can't even list off the amount of SaaS.
That's an interesting question, actually, right? Because 136 apps. I will say at the former MSP I was at, we had 66 of our applications, I think it was, that were totally under either SSO or full, you know, some degrees of that space. And so I'm wondering if that 136 apps, how many people know how many apps they have? I wonder how many get even within 10% of the number of how many apps they have, especially when you get into a 100-user environment.
Well, and too. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to throw this in. I'll tell you the answer because I've asked this question dozens and dozens of times.
I'm curious. Yeah.
You get 3 answers. You always get the first answer is either, you know, that's pretty good, Daniel. It's either like it's like 3 to 10, right? It's like they just I use these things, I know what I'm using. The other is this ballpark, I don't know, like 30 or 40. But my favorite answer always,
right, like I use 3 to 10, so it must be my 3, and then the 30 is some extrapolation of that in their mind, right? Like they're like, oh, there's twin people that are, it must be this many. Yeah.
It's like going out there and just blindly hitting and hoping you're right. But my favorite answer comes from an IT leader I heard a couple weeks ago. He goes, we use all of them. I don't know how many there are out there, but we use all of them. That's the answer. And he's actually closer with all of them than he is with 5.
But shadow IT is a real problem, even if you look at it from a security or cost perspective. You have your brand reputation. Like in our former one, we went and bought 1 seat of enterprise Dropbox just to lock up the domain, right? Just to be able to say, no, you can't use that email address to sign in. And so, like, I mean, I think that kind of stuff is a real problem. It's still a real challenge, and I think it's an unrecognized challenge for most industry today. Is that people have been taught that security is tools, security is sexy antivirus, security is an endpoint or a SOC. No, security is data and where it flows and who has access to it. And if you take an Excel document and put it in your Dropbox so you can work on it at home because your industry doesn't have any way to protect it, everything goes out the window. Like it's completely valueless, everything else you did to try to protect it. And so like security is having those kind of maturity understandings of where does my data flow. And it's really, I think it's in the opposite of how most people think of security today. So yeah, this is quite poignant, I think, in that regard, but it gets easier if you know what your apps you're using.
Well, and I think earlier, as John said too, when it came to like SaaS, like you look at the old environment of on-premise, and to get an application, you had to buy it, install it somewhere. IT was necessary to deploy that app. I mean,
yeah,
you need an email address and maybe a credit card nowadays to just spin up SaaS. And so that's why it's so hard. So it doesn't go through IT. So you've got marketing and HR and other departments that will just spin things up. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, hold on, IT's like, I have 15 apps, and they have no idea.
Bro, you're speaking to my heart, right? Like, so we were going in and trying to set up DKIM and DMARC with real active signing, right? So for anybody not following, it's the email security hardening stuff. But when you do that, you're basically telling the world to reject mail if it's not from one of these listed approved sources. And so we get marketing like pissed off, and they're like, what is going on? We can't. And we're like, what are you using? Well, we went and bought this one because HubSpot didn't do this. And we're like, how does this not come? And everybody laughs, and maybe I felt like we were stupid as a company, but I'm finding that's every company, right? And I think you just pulled that trigger for me. Marketing has a credit card. They're often tied to a sales budget. They're often tied into that I have an unlimited credit card. And all you have to have is an email address, and an email flows, right? So, yeah.
We're at a time when software does not have to come out of the IT budget.
Exactly.
And that's it, Matt. You know what it really is? I put out a report the other, like early in the holidays, and I put this out, and I think it was YC who did the data. So whoever's data checking me, I'll find the real source if that's not it. But they said 40 new unicorns were born every single month last year. And a unicorn in SaaS is $1 billion company. So 40 new unicorns every month, 480 new $1 billion SaaS companies last year. And you know the #1 tactic for sales? What we got here?
I like you got a Trekkie. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. He says much MSP is less about breaking and fixing computer issues, but more about data, process, security issues. And also, like, I think focusing on the other part of it, it's actually about enablement, right? It's about that trusted advisor. I joke, but like, you know, one of the challenges of going through the Industrial Revolution or going through some new technology space is that oftentimes the support behind it isn't there yet for the structure. And if you look at like the medicine, for the longest time, medicine was, can I saw off this leg and can I cauterize it, right? And leeches. And that was like most of medicine for a long time. And then as it grew, you still had these generalists that were expected to know thousands of diseases and hundreds of different treatments for things and all. And so you see this like encapsulation of having something like a AMA that starts guiding and giving principles on that, and some regulation body. And we don't have that. And so we're having to fight through this like no barrier to entry model where anybody can come and say, I'm an MSP, or I'm doing this, or I'm technology guy Matt, and no validation to know that we know what you're talking about. And so like a lot of those things come together to make the conditions we live in around this, but it means that often being seen as a professional and a member of the board and a seat at the table is something we don't start with in technology. And I think you're seeing that shift, and I think that's what the MSP is shifting towards. And to this point, saying, hey, it's less about breaking fixes, it's about business outcomes. It's about business objectives, and security is a risk objective conversation, right? And how we do things from an operational perspective and how we get support and how we buy and consume software can be just as much about operational efficiencies and capabilities as it ever could about this miasmic security risk and challenge. So I like to focus on the positives, not the issues, but I agree with the statement in general. So yeah, and then I've got my buddy Matt coming in and saying, hey, man, how you living? I'm living life amazingly, brother. I actually kind of, to put this out there, I'm an introvert in general. I actually don't like talking to other people and being out in the open. I prefer to be in my little cave. And so I actually about a year and a half ago had a bit of a midlife crisis and just started saying yes to everything. If somebody said, hey, let's come and chat about this, or let's go do this, or let's start a live channel. And so life's been freaking amazing just because I've really put myself out there a lot in the last year. And I would caution any of you to do the same thing. It's hard to be a thought leader if you're not talking about your thoughts. So yeah.
That's right.
Man, we got tons of comments. I'm going to try to walk through them for a sec, though. My boy Tim Golden, if electricity flow through it, IT's got to deal with it. We're not involved. It's not supported. Fair enough. That's hair dryers are rough there. But, yeah, I love you, Tim. Got a hashtag agree here, or front slash. Yeah, I know. This is great. Like, I think Daniel's pulling on my chain here, right? But, like, you know, the point is that this is this challenge we're all wrestling with. There is no such thing as an MSP or an MSSP. No such thing as an EDR. No such thing. All of these are marketing constructs we've tried to put around a complex thing that people don't understand, right? And when you start talking about MSSP and MSP, in my opinion, there's this trigger because in reality, if you're touching the frickin' data, you're responsible for it. And that's the way this is going to work out. And if you're going to try to say, oh, I'm just a plate spinning MSP. I only touch the technology. I'm only touching the patches. Well, if you're not advising towards it, you're not building defensibility. You're not helping the client build its own defensibility in that same way. And you're not empowering them. And so I whatever you want to call it, put a letter on it. But I agree with you, Daniel. Like they're saying, oh, you now do security because you put Sentinel-1 on, which I love Sentinel-1. But it's not about that. You have to have processes of how you got it on there. How do you make sure it's actually on there? What do you do when you start seeing people tap against it? How do you respond to things that are not the traditional malware signature-based thing? How do you, all of those are parts of this. Yeah, sorry. Pulled my dang string on this one. Yeah.
Well, too, what you see a lot of times, too, is like with security, you know, this like, I want to security. What do you have? What do you have first? What are we securing? I mean, security is great, but like,
yeah, right. Yeah. Like, are you going to scare me? Shit, tell me what you got.
Yeah. What are we securing first? Which is all of our clients, we begin right away. We do an immediate first step is like we deploy SaaSlio, see what's in their environment, and then we look at IAM. Like, what is IAM? Which typically they're going to say nothing. You know, they're going to say, hey,
they won't know the translation for sure, right? They're like, I don't know.
Yeah. So right away, I'm like, as the MSP, I'm liable for this stuff now. So like, I want to know what kind of holes do I need to look for. So my first thing is to plug all the holes on identity access management, and then we're going to look at everything else and kind of go from there.
That's huge. And so you're talking about like what I'm telling MSPs today. So this is kind of like this. If I'm transitioning to this model, Matt, how would I go down this path to be defensible? And if you haven't heard my defensibility talk track, I'm happy for you. If you have, I apologize. But it's this long form conversation of this. Right now, we find ourselves in a world where it's not well-known technology. We don't have any precedents in the courts around how these things play out. We're seeing lawsuits play out between giants like Merck and their insurers. We're seeing things like Travelers when they shot their first shots in 2020 in July of 2021, and they said, "Hey, we need every switch to be MFA'd." And they're all grasping at these like, what are the hygienic best practices that need to exist? And I think what drives me so poignantly is that those all exist very easily in a world that isn't encumbered by the traditional infrastructure world. If I take it upon myself to understand that I'm going to be working from Starbucks, I'm never going to need to go back to the office. I don't give a shit about printing anything. I'm going to do everything in SaaS applications. I'm going to sign everything with remote application signatures. I'm going to do it all with an IAM-centric model, right? Like if I start thinking about that forward, that's where we're heading. I mean, that's the world in front of us. And I think that as you start thinking about what it's like to secure that's where zero trust becomes a reality. I think zero trust, you know, as an idea with traditional infrastructure, traditional hybrid environments, self-hosted applications, back to your point, Cody, like that's not a reality. It's security theater. And so I think this is where we're heading towards an actual securable world because of some of these factors playing out right now. And Tracy looks like he's got a legit beard. So just want to lay that out there.
Nice one.
Yeah, for sure.
Challenger.
So back to this point of like, if you're an MSP today, what are the thoughts on, you have a bunch of clients that know that their competitors starting up tomorrow, while they may not have the momentum that their clients do, they will be able to hire talent better. They will be faster and more flexible, right? Oh, I got lost. Defensibility. Man, I got sidetracked easy. But what I'm telling MSPs today about defensibility is your job based on that legal landscape is not to defend your client's network. Your job is to be defensible in how you chose to defend your client's network. right? And you're seeing where that network is a shifting sand, right? But you're talking about fundamentals that are part of that. If you look at CIS, identity and access management is part of the CIS top 18 controls, right? And going through that with your clients goes right after control number 1 and 2, which are know thyself. What are your devices? What are your software assets? So like you're really covering 3 of the CIS top 18 in your first meeting and adding value and starting to say, hey, this is the base we build our world on, these concepts. And then everything beyond that is the value add, right? That's the how do I add more security? Where do we add the most security? And one of the funniest things I've heard, and I love to use this analogy, was you can spend $1 million protecting $1, right? Like you can, and it doesn't work. It's not a business case. You fail. So it's kind of this concept of like we need to know what the data is and what it's worth and why before we move forward, because otherwise we're wasting our time here. And I think I love your approach of asking that question first. I have this analogy where you're telling me you want me to protect your Cadillac, right, Cody? So, hey, man, I'm going to pay you to protect my Cadillac overnight. Well, it's one thing if you're going to pay me that money and I'm going to sit out in a chair and I'm going to maybe doze off and everything's fine in the morning, but luckily we're good. It's another if you told me, hey, Matt, by the way, there's $3 billion in bearer bonds in the back seat, and they're all absolutely whoever has them, and you can just take them. The windows don't roll up, and I've been advertising it for 3 months. I would probably take a much different protection path, right, for that. So,
also, it's 2 a.m. in Compton.
yeah, 100%. The place matters too, right? Like, and that does matter. Like going to this hotel. If you're in a hotel, I'm attacking you. Period. If I'm in the same hotel as you, I'm most likely enumerating the wireless weaknesses. 100%. Like, just my natural tendency. So, like, consider where you are about that data, and that's what I love about SaaS is you can kind of make zero trust a reality. Where you make the firewall and the endpoint be that end consumption, right? The end of the human's fingers. If you're trying to touch the data, then all these conditions must apply. Do you guys do any work around IAM and conditional access and things that kind of drive some of that systemic way to enforce this?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We do a lot up front of kind of establishing like what is the roadmap, right? So there's like some like 3 things that you do automatically, are like ASAP, hair on fire, got to do those things. Outside that is it's a laying out, okay, like what are dependencies? This must be that done before that's done. But yeah, that's always we have like 15 things we'll lay out, and a lot of them follow CIS or like a NIST. Hey, buddy.
That's my boy here, Duke. But so on the roadmap, like, what's your intent? Like, if I had to ask you, walk into a company that has no real like formed like security strategy or posture, what is your roadmap timeline? Like, help people set their expectations. Is that 3 weeks? Is it 6 months? Is it a year?
Honestly, it's very fluid. We lay it out what needs to be done, and then we go say, okay, now here's what needs to be done. Here's a cost for each step. Some are free, some cost money. How fast can you digest this, and at what risk is it for you to elongate that digestion of that roadmap? So that's really not a question I can answer because it's not my money. I'm just an advisor to say these are high-risk things you want to hit easier and go from there. So
and they're formative ones, right? Like you have to have this or else you can't do this. And so you're actually just laying out like candy cane laying, right? Like you're just like, here's the path you must take. There's a ladder, there's a chute. I know I've mixed a couple games, but I'm doing that not to get sued.
The goal is to get to college, right? You can't jump from 5th grade to college. It's just like, hey, you got to go through some steps.
That's really cool. I like the structure, and it also kind of mirrors what I say. We're trying to teach our people at the company I work for now how to educate around CIS as like a path, a walk down the journey of getting to what I call bell curve resistance, right? Some degree of like, I'm going to do the stuff that makes me not the low-hanging fruit, right? I'm going to have 2-factor. I'm going to set up things that allow me to have administrative controls. And some of the challenges that I think people run into in what you're doing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, would be the hearts and minds problem, right? Because it's usually not the technical controls that beat you. It's the inability to get someone, and Tim Golden might like jump up and down in his seat on this one, but like, is to get the hearts and minds behind it on the executive side, on the company that have to be part of this. It's not a one-way street. How do you overcome that? Or is that a challenge, or just kind of elaborate on that?
It is. It's always a challenge. And I kind of begin with one thing saying like, just out of the gates, the good guys on us, we're up against, it's not where the chips are against us. Mm-hmm. We have to be right every single time. The bad guys have to be right one time. So from our standpoint is we have to say, okay, so what is the cost? Not what is the cost of the solution? What is the cost of you not doing this? And so we kind of get away from that and then look at insurance and with cybersecurity insurance and say, like you said, I love your analogy of the $1 million to guard $1 because you're right, you can't do that. And so we kind of go back and say, do what's best practice, do what's a good hygiene, just like with insurance with a car. And so we say, the idea at the end of the day is, you said, don't look attractive. I want you to insurance companies look like a 70-year-old in a Buick, not a 16-year-old in a Mustang.
I want you, hold on. No, that's the line of the day. I want you as the insurance company to look like a 70-year-old in a Buick, not a 16-year-old in a Ferrari or something to the effect.
Yeah, and a Mustang. That's how we want you to look. And so all those checks just look beautiful on there. Like, hey, this is what we're doing, and it's always tough. So, and like, okay, usually put it in that framework that makes more sense. Okay, now I see kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it. At that point, again, security. There's just a bunch. We kind of say,
and you're seeing it. I'm talking to at least 2 separate insurance companies that, in general, are making efforts to try to create classes of insurance, trying to create separation from an actuarial basis, trying to understand the data and say, is this a 70-year-old in a Buick, or is this the 16-year-old in the Mustang, right? Like, and I think that we all can easily get that juxtaposition as to which one's cheaper from an insurance perspective, right? Like, but we're not there yet in technology. And I think part of this is that education challenge for those clients to say, I know you're going to have your sales guy running in here getting all pissed off because he can't sign up for this new application and he can't use his machine and install what he wants. But that's the one that's free. There's no cost to take away administrative rights except for support and hearts and minds, right? That's it. Yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry.
And I think here, like Timothy made a good point, that's corporate culture. And what we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes has not been really IT. It's been business problems. And I think, harkening back to what you said earlier, Matt, I mean, we're talking about the MSP being the advisor, basically a business partner. And I think that this just continues to beat that same drum. I mean, we're not talking about putting technology in the problem solver. We're not talking about making them look like a 70-year-old Buick driver for any reason. We're talking about because it's a business problem. Like, we're not talking about IT problems here anymore. And I think that's that next wave. That's that modern MSP coming out here. And that's what it's going to have to look like.
Yeah, I hate that I can't click on this in the software, Matt. I apologize, but I'm guessing, you're alluding towards the Connecticut law that's actually an incentivization model. And there's 24 states right now publishing privacy laws or basic cursory, cybersecurity laws and things like that. And so we're seeing that. And also, we got Daniel popping in with the insurance underwriters in Canada are horrible when it comes to understanding what and why they are insuring. Mm-hmm. Bro, you're not wrong. It's not just Canada. It's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. You have this premise, right, that whenever I say I weigh X, I exercise Y, my blood pressure and these other vitals are Z, they can pretty well calculate out the cost to insure me, the death likelihood and time, the amount of profitability to be obtained over time. And then they can segment that into these classes of insurance, which means that if you're in this class, you must pay more than this class in order for us to make the right amount of profit and you still get paid. Like, that's the way this kind of works out. And that's the way insurance operates. And so if you deal with that when you're talking about cybersecurity, you have several problems there. We know how a human dies. We know how a car is driven when you're 16. We know how a car is driven when you're 20 and when you're 40. We understand some of those delineations. As long as you're not like MattLee and you have both eyes and they triangulate and land on stuff and you can like tell depth perception, right? Then you have some base, and maybe even that goes in the actuarial data. But when you're dealing with cyber, there's no barrier in entry to the guy turning the wrench. There's nothing that says that just because you have a firewall, it's efficaciously deployed. It has the right rules. It's doing the right things. You're actually doing these measures of standard of care. There's no definition of standard of care. There's nothing that comes in. So you get into this real problem where they went out and bet on these horses, but they were either A, willingly or unwillingly lied to about the data and the actuarial outcomes, or just maybe it's just blind happiness and hoping it's going to work out. But now they're finding, Jesus, there's 3,900 separate ransomware events that have been paid by insurance that are tracked on doubleextortion.com. Right? And so like you get into this world where all of the insurers are now tightening the belt. It's what's called a hardening insurance market is the term. And you're starting to see them put in barriers to entry, say that there's a clause for act of war, add in these other things that are making that market kind of like just cauterized, so it's not bleeding as bad. But back to the very beginning point, we're not looking at the underlying cause of the problem. The underlying cause of the problem is everyone thinks security is simply a tool. And it's not true. It's all the other operational things that make sure that the dump trucks get the right place, that their tire pressure's right, that they've been maintained correctly, that the driver's not drunk, that you have good records, that your insurance matches, that you have the state operating licenses to run the dump truck, that you have the right schedule, that your software is functional, your phones work, that you, right? We start thinking about all the things that go into normal day-to-day business operation. And yet when we start talking about cyber, they're like, I just want to add another pooter. I just need one. And you're like, how's that same human, the human that's making these executive decisions? And that's the gap, like in my opinion right now. So yeah, sorry, pulled my string there.
Hey, we have clients at insurance companies that have the exact same thing. Is they're looking at how can we assess, and the problem is, like you mentioned with like blood pressure, that's easy to check. They can go here and
yeah, there's an industry accepted way to check that, right? We don't put a finger in your mouth to check blood pressure. It's not how we do it.
Yeah. When someone's like, yeah, I do all these things, you're like, okay. They just pass it on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Matt is hitting on something that's near and dear to my heart, right? Is this safe harbor concept that we're starting to see pop up in some states of this, if you can prove that you've followed a framework and that you're not just shooting from the hip, then you're not necessarily liable. I think that gets into some interestingness and how that plays out when it comes into the other things that come into that. But I do like safe harbor type positive reinforcement models that have popped up. First one was like, I think HIPAA came out with some conversation around that, and or whatever it is, DH. Yeah. So, but the point that I'm trying to make is that we're starting to see defensibility and the ability to show proof of following a framework and driving forward on a framework and iterating and being better than you were yesterday is going to be a very strong way to make it in this current like chaotic days today, I suppose. But yeah, like, so from an MSP, we've talked about a lot of change. Like MSPs are used to an efficiency conversation. MSPs are used to, I will buy a tool because it makes me more efficient at this. And because of that, I can get a W2 multiplier that's better than what you would have had. And I can put in mature processes that, and all of that's commoditized. Like if you look forward at it all just being Azure AD, it's literally just a script. I just changed the global tenant ID I'm targeting and the secret address and password, right? Like that's it. So yeah. I think that's the change. What's the framework? I'm going to slap Tim next time I see him. He's
been trolling you this whole time, man.
He's been trolling me hard, and I love Tim to death. He's fantastic.
We'll have to check his blood pressure next time.
Yeah. But as we see insurers figuring this out, though, it's going to be the single driving force, I think, for a lot of business for people, right? I don't know about you, Cody. How many of your clients brought you the insurance application over the last year and said, oh, my God, this is huge?
140%, because they all brought me, plus their friends. Hey, I got a friend over here also. Can you look at his policy too? And I can look at any policy, but
yeah.
But, yeah.
And it's because they're asking questions like, do you have MFA? What and they're calling out specific products. Like they're like, hey, do you have Okta? Do you have this? Are you using Duo? Do you have Sentinel-1? And so they're asking a lot of those questions around this, like, and so I think that's going to drive a lot of business decisions to have these conversations if you're ready to have them as an MSP.
Yeah, I tried to tell one of them, I was like, target the objective, not the tactical response, because like they'll knock off points if you don't say I'm not using Azure MFA, but they don't ask if you're using MFA, just Azure MFA. So it's not an actual valid feedback. And so I'm trying to tell our clients, like, ask control type language, not like branded.
Oh, dude, you're right back on pulling my string again, right? Like this is the problem. Somebody showed me this in thing and it says, and specifically around like, if you answer it and you're lying, and it was down to this like details, the subrogation clauses will eat you up, right? The insurance companies are going to come after the one saying it. But the question is something like, do you use Azure AD or do you use do you use MFA? On what? Let's zoom in. On what? Your primary identity, your secondary, these SaaS applications, Dropbox, the local machines, the stuff. And so like you get into like just a yes answer has so much final granularity down below it that could have been 100 no's and 2 yeses in the way you asked the question. I'm going to answer it yes. Right? Well, and like, yeah, sorry.
I think one of the challenges, Matt, is I just literally got off a phone call before we hopped on this podcast, and I was talking with an insurance provider down south, and they're like blown away. They're like, this shadow IT thing is a problem? And it's because they're so focused on putting checklists that they don't even know how to look at the unknown. They don't even know how to like conceptualize the unknown. And I think the unknown is what makes it so challenging. I mean, as Cody said, the first thing he does is discover. The first thing the MSP does is discover. But the unknown is what's making this insurance conversation so challenging, because what are you doing? What are you protecting? What is multi-factor authentication on? Where So it's just going to be hard. That form's going to be 1,000 questions long.
Well, and Matt's point here is actually I want to speak and elaborate on is like, yeah, I'm looking at, as I'm describing this about the insurance company, as like, remember when you fell in the pool that first time and like you're just reaching up like crazy and hoping something to grab, and you grab that one thing and then the pool noodle, and then all, like, they're just grasping at straws, right? They're in this abject loss space where they're continuing to have loss, they're continuing to raise their prices, they're continuing to see this not scale. The incident response alone from a management and operation perspective, and the lawsuits that it creates and all the work that it creates is expensive as well. And so you start getting into like, and I imagine with you having insurance clients, you can speak towards this, but it's just they're grasping at straws. And I think them asking for this stuff is also the speaking towards the lack of education and the barrier there of going, these guys are too stupid to just ask the question and have them meaningfully answer it. So maybe if I ask all the little tiny questions, I can get through that. That can't live either, right? We have to get to a point where our profession is a trusted profession and there's a standard of care and a barrier to entry and things that say, are you meeting these standards? But in the same breath, as we're moving forward with less and less variables, as we've talked about, and more APIs are the world, more and more access to these things, you can start gathering empirical data. Yes, no. Is this setting set? Yes, no. Is this turned on ubiquitously? Yes, no. And you can start making decisions from an insurance perspective on real data. Even if you're wrong, you now have real data to be wrong about and learn. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Teach, not preach.
Teach, not preach. Well, I don't know. That's a fine line for me, Tim. I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. I'm always preaching, but I'm hoping I'm teaching too.
Well, that's awesome.
Oh, that's good. And Juan Fernandez, are you guys familiar with Juan? Do you guys know Juan Fernandez?
I do not.
Juan's good.
Absolute rock star in the channel, operations wizard, and personal friend. So good to see you here. Same thing with Tim, obviously. But Juan said there's a great group of friends, so I had to pop it in there.
I'll find him on LinkedIn.
Yeah, good guy, for sure.
And I think Juan would be agreed here. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but a lot of what we're talking about here, this next generation, this IT, it's not IT.
He's already doing it. I mean, he's already living it. It's just consultancy, right? Like it's, 100%. Well, and what's great about it though is if we can teach and we can drive it forward, we can actually shift the market too, right? Yeah. If we can be the enablers and the people that also help secure this and make up for some of our predecessors' choices and in that world, I think we can help our people win. What Matt said, he said the best analogy he's heard is to become the pharmacist level of respect. Yeah, I think pharmacist would be fair. Doctors good too in the same conversation. The challenge is in any of these, you need to have some method to remove those providers, right? If you look at the bar, you can disbar someone. If you look at the doctors, you can lose your license, right? If you look at CPAs, you can have the AI CPA no longer allow you to be called that. You can, right? So you can start getting into these like self-corrective measures that our industry doesn't have. And the problem would be that if we tried to regulate MSPs directly and just say, we're going to regulate all MSPs, I'm just going to go hire Cody to work in my office. Like, what's the difference? I'm still going to make the same bad decisions, right? And so like you have to almost be more like a FINRA model, in my opinion. If we maybe we want to pull the cat out on that one, and it's a long form conversation, but FINRA has broker dealers, right? And broker dealers have brokers, and those brokers can be revoked. The broker dealer has a certain level of fiduciary responsibility over their actions, and is a self-policing model, right? And in my mind, I think you might see something like that in the future, where people that organize as MSPs are a broker dealer and have a different set of restraints because of the multi-access, and people that work for a company still have to be registered and have to be held to a certain standard and have to be willing to understand that if I come in here and I do something that's not okay as a legal attorney in your organization, I could be disbarred outside of your organization, completely unable to practice law any further, right? And so that doesn't exist for us. So there's nothing to actually correct the flood of the us's, if that makes sense, right? And I would see that shifting to a self-regulatory model in the next 10 years, 15 years maybe, but it needs to happen yesterday. So,
and amen.
Well, Tommy Vaughn jumping in here. What is cybersecurity? You're fired. May God have mercy on your soul. No, I'm just kidding. I love it. Great question. He's teasing me.
Business ethics.
Yeah. True story. Yeah, no doubt. Go ahead, John. I cut you off like 19 times, buddy.
No, you're good, man. I was just going to make I know I'm like lagging here, so you can cut me off. You don't know if I'm talking or not. I'm throwing you for a spin.
Oh, you're being very nice to me. No, I cut you off hearing you. I apologize.
This guy, early in the chat, what is cybersecurity? I was just laughing. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've ran into somebody. They said, go to the vendor shop. Just go to the vendor shop, download a few pieces of tools, throw them out there, and you're good. You're done. And we beat it to the drum a million times, but that's not cybersecurity. Like tools, you wouldn't call him a mechanic if he didn't have a drill. Like he still needs to be able to get
exactly right. Like they're table stakes, right? Oh, let's wheel him into surgery. Oh, we don't have a scalpel. We're just using the finger today. I apologize. It doesn't heal as well.
MattLee's figured out how to get your blood pressure with just the finger now anyway.
yeah. It's that nanu thing. But no, like, but seriously though, that's such a great point. Like, we are in an industry where we act like the tools are this like Carter's got pills problem, right? Like we got a new Carter pill, like we can try this. Here's your, but as the market matures, you'll start seeing that tools are about what does it take to actually deliver a bell curve risk reduction. Right? How do I make it to where the amount of risk that's left in your organization is enough that you can either accept it or insure it? And if you're insuring it, you're not lying to the insurance carrier, and they're not walking in like an idiot handing you insurance that's not meant for you because they don't even understand the risk. So we're going to see a maturation in that space, but it'll have to come, in my opinion, with some degree of maturation in. Now we say you need to fill out this form because that's going to help us with insurance. What if the person reading it doesn't understand the form?
Yeah.
And that's the likelihood right now. Our ProServe team gets tons of requests to just help people with the form, which shows, and I don't mean this in a diminutive way. I think this is just speaking to the challenge we have as far as a barrier to entry conversation. There's a lot to be learned. It's funny, back in the Industrial Revolution, you had like the chief of electricity in a factory. Their job was just to deliver power, to make sure that we had. It didn't get any less complex. It just got commoditized. I now know that three-phase power is going to be 110, 110, 110 with X number of amps, and that's what I'm going to be able to put it together. It's going to run this machine because it matches the bolts. Like they became Legos. But someone's still managing the complexity. We're seeing the same thing happen in the cloud. The cloud doesn't make it any less complex. It's still servers. They're still strung together with communication. They still have access control. They still have broken access. They still have things. We're just trading some of that scalability the same way power does. And I'm not saying power is perfect, but I don't know, 98, 99% of the time I've got electricity. Maybe 99.97. Yeah. And I don't electrocute myself much. So.
I think you're onto something. The MSP can't be the director of electricity. Like that could be the title of your next podcast. They can't be the director.
The director. There's a book about it, so I know I'm stealing this, unfortunately. But yeah, it's somebody. I was speaking about it on stage down in Tampa a couple weeks ago, and the guy in the audience goes, "There's a book about that," and I was like, "Oh, fair." Terrible. I feel terrible. Anyways, and we're getting to the end of time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time here, but Tommy Vaughn says, listen, incident report, super helpful to getting CEOs to understand cyber insurance and risk, softens the blow before opening the wallets. I'm assuming he's talking about actually saying, let's look at what an incident. I love tabletop exercises that kind of make you think through the emotions of it. I don't think what most people realize is when you have a giant cyber event, like it's traumatizing. Like I still will tear up if we get into the right conversation, right? And I think going through those things to try to bring it to something that makes sense, Tommy, is super helpful. Of getting people to understand what cyber risk is and what insurance is and what they've always been able to say. That's the smart guy. That's Cody. Cody's got this. I don't need to be a member of this participation and conversation. Is now transferring into, no, you're going to have to be educated enough, just like that dump truck needs this much hydraulic capability, right? You don't necessarily get into the percentages, but it's got to be able to lift the bucket. Like, I need you to get to that level of understanding, Mr. and Mrs. Board member, right? So,
and Tim makes a point. I'll make a good closing point here. I was talking with a good cyber firm recently about this, and it's like, there's an app for that. There's an app for SOC 2. There's a SOC 2 automation SaaS application. You can plug it into Azure and your SOC 2 can plug it.
But SOC 2 is all about service roles and processes and that. Anyway.
I know, but here's the thing. We have to get to a point where it's like, there's always going to be a tool for it. There's always going to be a solution for it. Everybody's going to try to get to the bottom dollar to pass it. But we have to help our customers understand what the outcome is of doing that bottom dollar decision. We have to help our customers understand that just cutting to the bottom isn't going to be the best option. And until everybody realizes that, cutting costs here isn't the right area to cut costs on, we've got a lot of education to do. And hopefully got another, 91 podcasts, MattLee, and hopefully eventually everybody picks it up.
I hope one day people go, Matt, you're just preaching to what everybody already understands. Would you shut up? That would be the time it's time to retire, man.
There's nothing more painful than when someone's like the SOC 2 tools. Like, man, like SOC 2's custom written controls. There's no way to automate it. There's no way to automate custom.
And you can make it easier, and you can make it guided, and you can give it some context and some wraparound. But damn it, if we don't understand who's carrying the data from there to there, and how it gets here, and how we're going to write these things down, how we're going to support it, how we're going to do service, how we're going to, you can't tool your way through that, right? That's just elbow grease, and it's grease that never stops happening. Nor would the way you schedule your dump trucks ever stop evolving. Nor would the way you schedule and deal with your legal space ever stop evolving. We've just lived in this world where technology was the magic black box, as my grandma used to call it. Right? And now it has to be demystified a little bit. We can't live with this arrogance of, oh, I'm the smart guy. But in the same breath, we can't ask our executives to zoom way in and understand all of it either. And so it comes down to bringing it to the business conversations. Tommy hit that nail on the head as well. So we are way over time. I don't want to get in trouble. I might get paid $0 less than I'm getting paid now doing this, so it would be bad. But it's been a blast, gents. And I always love seeing people that see things kind of the way that the world seems to be shaping, in a different light and a different view. And Cody, it's cool to hear you're already out there kind of leading with that understanding of SaaS forward world. So it's awesome. And John, you're just here for the ride. It was nice seeing you, buddy.
I'm just here for the ride. I appreciate the entry point, Matt.
You brought me a cool dude to chat about my experiences with, man. You got, yeah.
I'm the dot connector. That's why I'm here.
That's it. That's it.
Oh,
well, congratulations on your recent engagement. I wish you all the happiness in the world. What a cool story. So very awesome. And thanks everybody for being here. It was great seeing y'all, and we'll see you in about maybe a week and a half for the next one.
Cheers.